Leveraging innovative marketing strategies like AI and targeted branding to drive sustainable growth and maintain a competitive edge is not without challenges. Let me just highlight a few. One major hurdle is, of course, reaching highly specific and narrow targeted audiences across fragmented channels and platforms. Yet another is that most existing marketing technologies and AI solutions were built for mass consumer marketing rather than the precise targeting needs of B2B companies. Yet another is that with significant investments required for new marketing technologies, B2B firms often struggle to clearly demonstrate ROI and quantify the impact of revenue growth. And finally, there's the issue of integrating new technologies seamlessly with existing business systems and processes. So, how can we overcome these? Our guest has answers. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutworth.com. I'm Vinay Goshi, and our guest is Aditya Varanasi. Now, Aditya, I believe you never really thought of being an entrepreneur until much later. You trained as a chemical engineer, acquired your MBA, and spent something like 14 years at PepsiCo, if I've got that right. And
Correct.
today you are the founder and chief executive officer at Awarity, where you disrupt the advertising industry by making world class marketing more affordable and sustainable for up and coming companies. I'm curious, Aditya, I believe you faced a certain point where you had to make a choice between heading back into corporate America or taking a risk. I wonder if you could tell us about that and what you saw as the opportunity in the advertising space to create Awarity as we have it today.
Yeah. No, first off, thank you so much for having me on, Vinay. Really appreciate it
Pleasure.
and excited to talk to you. When I left PepsiCo, I was hired by a private equity firm to run a startup. And I thought I've got all this great experience on building a marketing strategy that can attract new customers. I'm just going to apply the same principles here at this small business. And I was just astonished at how much harder it is when you don't have the resources and expertise that's inherently available at a company like PepsiCo
Mm,
when you're at a small business. It was quite eye opening for me and started to give me great empathy for the smaller businesses that don't have those kinds of budgets and access. So that was really the impetus to think about starting a business like this. Coming from an engineering background and being in marketing, my mind is always focused on what are the steps and the process
mm,
that enable the marketing success. And so thinking of it more in terms of flowcharts and diagrams and how do you bring to life the process and then take that process and replicate it was always something that fascinated
mm,
me. I parted ways with the private equity firm, and I could not resist the idea of saying there's got to be a better way to help these small to mid-size businesses that can't afford a traditional agency, that can't afford the agencies we had at PepsiCo, and don't have the budgets to justify that kind of investment. There's got to be a better way to do this. And I started exploring the idea of creating Awarity at that time. In parallel, I was interviewing at various companies, many recognizable names I was fortunate to be able to interview at. And it was really a moment when I was at a pretty recognizable name in Seattle, waiting to head in for the interviews. I was talking to my college roommate, my best friend since sixth grade. And that's really where it prompted, you know what, I really need to do this. I really need to give this a shot. And we were fortunate we had a little bit of runway. We had prepared a little bit of runway financially to take that leap. But we had a mortgage and two kids. And my wife's primary job at that time, as the kids were young, was caring for them. But the kids were getting old enough that she was able to help and support. And she has some great business experience as well. So she was able to help join and assist. And as we started to get some traction, it wasn't much, but just getting enough traction, I still wasn't sure. So I actually didn't commit fully. I ended up taking up a job at Capital One,
mm.
running marketing for the auto refinance division, among a few other responsibilities there. And nights and weekends was working on this business where we had a handful of customers. And after a year at Capital One, I realized there really is a market need for what we're doing. The feedback we were getting from those customers was incredibly positive. They all talked about the impact it had on their business. And through that course of time, I started to see that there really is a pathway to scale this while keeping the price points affordable for those small businesses. And so after a year at Capital One, parted ways, and we went at this full time. That would have been in the spring of 2018.
Brilliant. And given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
I think I don't think there's a lot of people that have been a chemical engineer and then had the opportunity to work with brilliant marketers at a company like PepsiCo. And so the ability to have the inherent training you get as an engineer to be very process focused, linear, frame the problem, address the problem, think about mitigation, think about parallel paths, all those different things that you're trained at as an engineer. But then to apply that to the foundation that I had the opportunity to develop at PepsiCo, working with so many brilliant people, I think that's a really unique set of experiences. Then you couple that with that time at the private equity firm. I worked for a highly successful entrepreneur, and he served as a mentor for me. And I learned quite a bit about how to think about starting a business and the value proposition, the things you have to do in the early days to really take the business to where it can go. Because at each stage, you have to operate differently. When
Mm,
you're a scrappy startup with less than a few $100s a month in revenue, you have to operate very differently than, say, where we are today, where we have 30 people on the team and we're continuing to grow and invest in more capabilities to help these small businesses. So I think that trifecta is probably just, I was fortunate to have some very unique experiences in life. And looking back, it's interesting to see how they triangulated together to help with this opportunity, because there's no way I could have done what I'm doing now
mm.
without those experiences. And many times frustrations, to be honest. I wish that private equity startup worked out, but looking in hindsight, I'm glad it didn't, because it helped propel me to this point.
Certainly. It's interesting you mentioned these experiences. From a business point of view, I wonder uh, what would you say from your personal area of strength is something that businesses don't know but should?
Yeah, I think from my experience, I think the biggest thing that businesses, particularly small to mid-sized businesses, don't know is that if you only do the things you can track
Mhm.
explicitly, you're going to be limiting your growth. And let's take a step back. Take something as simple as sponsorship of a Formula One racing car.
Mhm.
It's a logo on a car. It costs a lot of money. Why do those brands spend on that? I can guarantee you there's nobody in the corporate office saying, we spent $100,000 on that. That's not the price. And we earned 300,000 in revenue from that. But they're clearly seeing an impact of having the name in that forum. It lends brand trust through credibility. If a brand can afford to advertise there, they're a credible brand. It demonstrates that it's a successful brand. It demonstrates that the brand has been around and is sustained and will be there going forward if they've able to sponsor a Formula One race car. And so when you start, if you tried to make that decision on, I'm spending this on the sponsorship, I expect this much on revenue, they would never do it. But they recognize the value of building a brand because so many purchase decisions are made before you even start the journey. For example, if I said, you need to buy a new vacuum cleaner, what are the three brands that come to mind right now? And you may think of one, you may think of two, you may think of five, but whatever those brands are, it is very likely your end purchase is only going to be among those brands that come to mind. And that's building brand
Yeah.
awareness. And a lot of times that purchase decision is made from brand awareness, but you can't attribute it directly. And because you can't attribute it directly, a lot of these businesses say, I'm only going to invest in the things
Mhm.
I can track purchases back to, which then limits growth because you're now missing all the people that have made that decision up front, and you're only able to win with the people that may not have already made that decision based on brand awareness. And so your growth becomes limited because you can only draw from a smaller customer base.
Mm. I wonder, with that way of thinking, there's both. I would imagine there's both a mind shift as well as a heart shift required to come around to your way of thinking, and in terms of how you measure or approach measuring advertising and marketing. How would you help someone navigate that journey?
Yes, there are KPIs. So just because you can attribute certain types
Mhm.
of advertising directly to sales, there are KPIs you can look at to ensure you're maximizing your ROI on that investment. And as you think about the customer journey from awareness to some level of brand engagement where they're doing research and staying closer to what you have to offer, ultimately to purchase, if you look at the KPIs for that stage differentially, it'll ultimately lead to a bigger pool of customers you can draw from and drive more purchase, but it takes time.
Mm.
And for example, if you're thinking about the impact of awareness, a company like PepsiCo could invest millions of dollars in massive surveys and market research to say, what is my aided and unaided awareness on these brands? A small business simply doesn't have the resources to do that, but they have other tools that can serve as a proxy. With your website analytics, most people use Google Analytics. You can actually see how many new users are you getting per month, how many returning users are you getting a month, where are they originating from. Now look, the geography isn't 100% accurate. Mobile devices, they can't always get the exact location, for example, but it gives you a sense on your on new users and returning users, and that can be a watermark for awareness. I can tell you, even for our brand at Awarity, in the early days when we started the business, we were lucky if we got 100 people on the site in a month. But we could see organically as we invested in brand awareness advertising, that number grew.
Mm.
But it didn't fully start to translate into sales revenue until we had the product features that truly met the market need for a low friction purchase. And so we continued to invest, we continued to build that, but it took a while for the revenue to come in because there's other components that were beyond advertising in our value proposition that we had to continue to improve to really reap the rewards there. So I think with that, the other thing to look at, the other KPI is, I always tell people start at the bottom and build up. If you have a strong bottom of the funnel, a strong ability to convert people to sales when you get them at the door, that's a good time to consider awareness advertising. But if you're struggling there, or each sale takes a lot more effort, you might want to wait until you make that process a little bit more efficient before you go invest in awareness advertising. But going back to your question, KPIs could be new website
Mhm.
visitors. You should look at unique reach of that advertising, frequency. You want to reach a lot of people that are potential customers. So look at the quality of that reach. What percentage of the people you reach do you believe are qualified customers? And you want that to be as high as possible. What are you spending to get that reach? Some channels can be incredibly efficient to deliver that reach. Other channels may deliver the same reach, but it might be significantly more expensive to get there. So it gives you cost comparison.
Mhm.
We look at reach. How frequently are you reaching them? You don't want to do it too much in a month because at some point you get diminishing returns. You don't want to do it too little because they're going to be forgotten. So you want to be in that mix of somewhere at least twice a month, but ideally 6, 7, 8 times a month if you're a newer brand on frequency. And then the last piece is make sure you're presenting a compelling message. Um, Commonly speaking, a lot of times people want to say everything, but you're just introducing yourself to someone. What is that one thing that makes your customer's life easier or better or more fulfilling that your competitors can't claim? And lead with that. Just use it to drive intrigue, not the whole story. Think of it like dating.
Mhm.
On your first date, you have some different conversations than you might right before you're ready to get married. And think of it like that with your funnel. You're just introducing yourself and you're seeing if there's a fit. And so I think with those three, you could use KPIs, those KPIs, reach, frequency, compelling message, and new website visitors to assess how efficient some of those different advertising channels might be for your brand. Give it a little bit of time. Don't turn things on for 1 week on and off. Give it a few months, but then you'll start to see how the trends are moving and you can assess if it's truly helping you build brand awareness or not without spending money on market research.
Mhm. Uh, the question that comes to mind is customer journeys. especially in light of advertising? How important is it to really flesh out the details of the customer journey?
I think it's critical if you want to be successful. Imagine you're selling B2B software. Maybe it's payroll software or accounting software, something very, very niche. The customer journey doesn't happen every day for those cycles. So you need to know, when do those decisions generally get made? Are they tied to year end? Are they tied to fiscal year for that business? Are they tied to some other timeline? When are those decisions made? I know that we have a payroll company. The competitors for that company are aware when my renewal is for the business, and they reach out to me heavy in the 2 months prior to that renewal period. That's being aware of my customer journey. They know if they advertise to me 6 months earlier, it's going to fall. They have zero chance, because we're not going to break a contract mid-year. So awareness of customer journey now, just on that one detail, tells you when to put your effort, time and effort, and avoid wasting. Then you start to think about, what are the other steps that they might look at? What are the pain points? If you're thinking about a payroll company, how easy is it to use? How much work do they take off your plate? How easy do they make reporting and analysis? What other value can they provide? Perhaps discounts on healthcare. Here in the US, that's a big expense for us, or healthcare expenses. How do they provide discounts and value there? Think about that hierarchy of decision points that the customer is going to think about. And we all generally know what those are. If we've spoken to customers, we have a sense on what those are, and start highest to lowest priority and make sure you know how to address them.
Mm.
The more that message speaks to us on the decision we're making, the more likely we are to notice it.
Mhm. And as you take potential customers through this journey, how do you, especially with advertising, how do you qualify leads and set realistic expectations with your potential?
Yeah. So look, I think I'll answer that in two parts. For potential clients, we always go out of our way to make sure they understand what is in our
Mm.
control and what is not in our control. What we're always confident, I should say almost always confident, promising, is that we can reach their potential customers more efficiently than any other form of advertising, and that we will drive an increase in website traffic. That's something we've just seen out of the 1,000+ campaigns we've
Mhm.
run for different businesses. We've seen that over and over again. We know we can do that, but we tell them we can't control how that impacts their top line and bottom line, because there's a lot of factors from advertising to purchase that we don't control and are not in our purview. And I will tell you, there are times businesses say, no, I just need leads and revenue. This isn't the right time. And we're happy to hear that. They're not a qualified lead. Maybe they recognize they have things to do on the purchase side of their advertising and marketing strategy that they need to improve. And some of them have said that. We're happy to say, we're here when you're ready for us.
Mm.
On the other side, we see even more of them appreciate that candor and say, I know what your role is. And it leads to a long-term, mutually successful partnership. They know what they're to expect from us. They're not expecting any more. They can hold us accountable to what we told them we can control and ask questions to that. But it keeps all of us from avoiding topics that we can't control and influence, and they know they need to go to other sources. So it actually leads to a more productive relationship mutually. I think for our business, when we're thinking about who do we engage with, and I know you have B2B SaaS clients similar to ours, some of the things that we do is we have a process where we will assess what we believe that brand is currently doing. So if somebody comes to us through our website and says, I'd like to book a meeting, we have a system in place to assess their website traffic, look at what other advertising they may or may not be running. How do they fill out the form? Are they filling out a form from a Gmail address or from a .com business address, as an example? And using those factors, our data science team has been pretty good at helping us predict who are people that whose business might be at the stage where additional advertising could be beneficial, and who are people where their business might need to still get some of the fundamentals in a stronger place before advertising. And it helps us tailor the message to them. If we're talking to somebody that's an experienced advertiser because they've tried many things, then we're going to want to explain how we're different.
Mm.
and what are the benefits we might bring and what are the things we may not be able to match. If it's somebody that is newer to advertising, we might tell them these are the pros and cons of working with us and here's what you should expect, and let them make an informed decision if it makes sense. And based on that's how we qualify and unqualify, is we listen to their feedback. And if somebody isn't ready, we'll be the first ones to tell them, hey, we think you should wait and invest your limited resources getting some other things done, but we're here once you're ready for that, once you complete that.
Mhm. Very interesting. Obviously, you incorporating AI into your product. I'm curious, could you tell us a bit more about it? How does AI come into your advertising strategies?
Yeah, I think about AI and I personally look at the parallels to when the internet emerged in the 90s. And when you think about the internet, like when that came out, we were saying a lot of the same things that are being said about AI. It's going to change our lives. It's going to make things more accessible. It's going to make our life easier. It's going to provide all of these benefits that people can say, but they feel somewhat abstract because we haven't experienced it. But if you look back and say, which are the businesses that really succeeded
Mhm.
during that transitional period, they're the ones that found a very specific use case for the application and focused on excelling with that use case, whether that's Amazon, even AOL, America Online for a period of time, just getting people online internet access during that period. They were very successful. That was their lane.
Mm.
That's how Google emerged. They focused just on search. People want to be able to find things on the internet. You think about the big companies now, they all found a very specific consumer problem that they could solve and used AI to solve it and then expanded. And so it became less of an abstract concept
Mhm.
of all the things that are possible, but became a very tangible, this is a specific use case we could address. We take the same philosophy in our business. We take very specific problems that generally require people and lots and hours, which then add cost, and we've instead used AI to run a lot of our ad operations. Those ad operations are the reason why traditional agencies have to charge higher minimums for our type of service and why we can charge a much more affordable price because we've developed our own AI to run those ad ops, and it'll run every tactic of every campaign differently. It's continuously improving. So the use cases we are utilizing now that we've developed ourselves is really heavy around campaign optimization to try to get our clients the lowest possible cost and the highest quality placement for their among their target customers. Things that would normally require a human to download a report every week, analyze the report, then go back and program changes, our AI is able to do daily
Mm.
and do with more consistent depth and uniquely on every single tactic of every campaign, which is a large volume of data to process every day that no human could match, but it enables us to make world class advertising more accessible to small business. We have many other use cases that we're going to be rolling out in the coming months and years. Some are already proven and developed, some continue to evolve. For example, we've developed and we're hoping to bring it to market to help these small to mid-sized businesses where they can upload a customer list, and we've developed our own AI to reference various data sources and generate customer personas just off of the customer email and phone number list and give you descriptions on what those customers are and what their interests and decision points are. So those are things coming in the future that we're working on as we, continue to try to make world-class advertising accessible to everyone.
Thank you for that. I wondered, could you share an example, maybe of a B2B company where your platform has allowed them to improve their campaign outcomes?
Yeah, on the B2B side, there are several. I want to be careful of naming too many names. What they've generally done is they've provided a specific industry, vertical, and geography that they're focused on. So if it's a bigger company, that's obviously going to be much larger. If it's a smaller company, it could be a local city that they want to focus on to win first. And then our goal is to advertise to the decision makers. The goal being, going back to the Formula One example, to build brand credibility, brand trust, and have those decision makers say, I've heard that name before. Oh, you guys do this.
Mm.
Because if you're picking up the phone and calling them, or somebody goes to their office, or you get a meeting, that meeting takes a very different tone if there is some level of familiarity with the company versus zero familiarity with the company. You'd much rather start the conversation with, I've heard of you guys. I know you guys do this and this, versus, who are you again?
Mhm.
How do you pronounce that name? It's a very different start to a sales call. And so those companies were very, I didn't imagine that we would get use cases in B2B when I started this, but it makes a lot of sense is we could efficiently target those decision makers, build top of mind awareness. It may not lead to people picking up the phone and calling, although that has happened, but I like to think of it as priming the pump for when the sales process ramps up. They're now more open to the conversation because they've heard of the company. Email studies show the same. They show this. I'm sure a lot of your listeners on the B2B side can attest. You generally have to send several emails to a cold contact before they'll respond. That's because you're building
Yeah.
awareness with them over that time. Get some of that done up front with advertising, and it can make the process go more efficiently.
Certainly. I would certainly agree with that one. And I think for most B2B companies, this idea of outreach, be it email or cold, is certainly familiar. But the idea of combining advertising with it is perhaps not so well understood or taken up. So that's an interesting use case. You've mentioned branding several times, and I'm curious. I'm sure your experience at PepsiCo has certainly influenced your thinking, but for, say, more of someone who's a bit of in the startup space, perhaps early on in their journey in the B2B space, investing in something like advertising and in particular promoting their brand can be a bit daunting. What would you say to them to reconsider their thinking and actually invest early on in that branding piece?
So I think there's two parts to it. And look, having built a startup, I know it's those early days are very
Mhm.
different. And I think my advice to them would be those first customers generally come from your network or the people around your network. And I treated each one of those conversations like a customer focus group. As much as I was trying to get a sale, I was really just trying to learn what pain points are they experiencing that we may be uniquely positioned to address. And to this day, we still do that. And we had a team conversation yesterday talking about let's make sure that we're treating our client services calls as focus groups. Like when we're talking to a customer, let's make sure we're understanding what else they're feeling and experiencing so that we can understand. That never changes. But I think it's up to the executive team to realize when they feel like they have a unique value proposition and an MVP that they're ready to start scaling.
Mhm.
And while advertising can benefit at any stage, it's generally going to have more benefit at the point when you're ready to start scaling, when you know you have product market fit, when you know that you're uniquely positioned, and when you have a better, deeper understanding of your customer and how your product uniquely helps your customer versus the alternatives. If you can check those boxes, that's generally a more efficient time to benefit from advertising. On the flip side, could you turn something on? Look, we've always had some form of advertising on. And I will tell you, in the early days when we didn't fully understand our value proposition, didn't have as deep an understanding of what our customer truly needs and how they want to be supported, our advertising wasn't as good. It wasn't as efficient, but it was because our pricing's so affordable. I viewed it as a way to at least get things in the market and start learning and getting feedback. So I don't think you can ever do it too early, but if you have limited resources, you have to think about where that fits in terms of making sure you get your product market fit and your MVP to fulfill that completed.
Certainly.
Everything's a trade-off.
Mhm. Yep. I'm curious. Do you run a podcast at Awarity?
We do not have
Okay,
a podcast.
because I'd be interested in getting your take with many of the activities that you described. If it would make sense for you to actually run a podcast and complete those activities as part of the overall conversations while also producing content that could be essentially used for brand awareness and advertising.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting.
Okay.
I'll have to think about it.
just a,
I'm just happy to. I'm happy to visit with you at your convenience.
just a thought, because a lot of what you were saying would certainly make sense to fit within the podcast framework if it was dealing with
Sure.
a specific unique value proposition, or certainly trying to find product market fit and explore issues. Just a thought there. Perhaps an episode in the future around that. We were talking about branding. I'm also aware of the fact that there's a lot of conversation around performance marketing. And so I'm curious, how do you correlate, if you do correlate, the issue of performance marketing, the conversations around performance marketing, and that of branding, especially in the B2B space?
I'm glad you asked that question. Look, I think on one hand, everything we do needs
Mhm.
performance. Everything we do needs to have some kind of an impact. There's absolutely no doubt. But the notion of the way that I've heard people talk about performance marketing, to me, is in direct violation of what the customer wants. The goal of marketing, the goal of advertising, the goal of a product is to delight a customer, provide value to a customer that is above and beyond what they are paying you in currency. And this idea of performance marketing, I think, can very quickly take you away from what is the customer's journey and what is the customer's need,
Mhm.
and look at your advertising and marketing from a perspective of me and all about me. And I think it's dangerous, candidly, when people say I need to just look at clicks and core and conversions and cost per conversion, because no purchase decision is ever just one ad channel.
Mhm.
And conversely, you can have times where a business has fantastic marketing, but they're not converting because people are not picking up the phone. People are not returning inquiries. People are not turning around proposals in a timely fashion. There's a host of things that ultimately go into that purchase decision, and different industries. I have the privilege of working with so many different industries here at Awarity. Every industry has a different path to purchase. And so, to me, I actually think this notion of cost per conversion that Google and Meta have created in many ways has ruined the discipline of marketing. And it's not for the sake of ruining a discipline or me wanting to do things the old way. It's taken people away from thinking of what the customer is experiencing to what do I want people to do and buy because they saw my ad.
Mhm. Um,
And I think you're going to get longer term, more sustainable growth when you're focused on the customer. And you're going to get a better ROI on those investments if you're focused on the customer versus focused on what I'm putting in and what I'm getting for myself.
mhm. Certainly makes sense. I'm curious, though, with that line of thinking, does that often entail creating new metrics as opposed to traditional
Yes.
metrics? If so, could you expand on that?
Yeah, so I think that goes back a little bit. We talked about the different
Mhm.
stages of the funnel. We talked about the awareness stage and some of the KPIs, reach frequency, how strong is your messaging, looking at how efficiently you're reaching the right people, new website users. On the engagement phase, you might focus on returning website users. Are we continuing to
Right.
get those people back for second and third visits with the different activities we're trying to engage? That could be blog content, it could be
Mhm.
emails, it could be social media content, a host of things for people that have engaged with your brand. And then at the purchase stage, look at where they're falling off on that path to purchase. Are they falling off from proposal to PO? Are they falling off from discovery to proposal? Where are they falling off there, and why might that be? Because that may be completely unrelated to advertising
Mhm.
metrics. A lot of people have told me, I've heard this a lot from people that were formerly focused on cost per lead. They've said, we're getting leads, they're just not very good quality. And that's what happens if you're just squeezing the bottom of the funnel for your growth. That's what's going to happen. You're going to have the people that are making last second decisions and may or may not be qualified or may or may not know about. Versus if you're building brand awareness, you're going to attract the people that are making a decision in a much more aligned fashion to the value proposition you're providing.
Mhm. I'd like to revisit this idea of advertising, and I think you talked about it in terms of trying to win over new clients. And quite often, advertising is seen as a means to acquire new clients. I wonder if there's a use case for client retention as well?
Hmm.
And if so, how do you currently see it playing out with your clients? And what room is there to look at advertising beyond perhaps our own particular platforms?
Oh, great question. So, look, even when I was at PepsiCo working on the Cheetos brand, we were advertising. Everybody knows what
Mhm.
Cheetos are. But the reason we had advertising was customers have nearly infinite choice when it comes to snacking. They could look at sweet snacks. They could look at cold snacks like ice cream. They could look at fruits, vegetables, potato chips, goldfish, a whole host of snacks out there. But the role of the Cheetos commercial was to remind you of the emotive benefit. It's this messy, weird shape. It's orange. It's cheesy. But when you eat it, you feel like a kid again. You don't think that literally. You don't
Mhm.
say, "I'm eating a Cheeto. I feel like a kid." But that's the sentiment you have when you enjoy Cheetos. And so all the advertising was done not to build awareness, but to remind people of that sentiment so that when they're looking for that reward, when they're looking for that snack, Cheetos makes sense for a subset of that because it's uniquely positioned. Now you translate that. We work with a lot of minor league baseball teams here in the United
Mhm.
States. So these are teams whose players feed into the major league clubs over time. And they're in generally smaller towns, but they're one of the better known activities to do in those small towns. And so families generally go out every at least once a season for a game. We did growing up. But one of the data points that they shared was that only 15% of buyers return year over year.
Mhm.
And advertising has brought them back, brought those returning buyers back year over year. Because if you only go once or twice a year, that's 365 days between purchases, potentially. A lot of things happen in that time. Advertising is a way
Mhm.
to stay top of mind. And to that end, I think there's two additional anecdotes I'll share. One is we can do the same thing for two different teams, and they're both going to track a different level of ticket sales from the campaign. That's because of all the other factors not in our control. What else are they doing in advertising? What's their experience in the stadium? How new is the stadium? What's the weather been? What kind of game day experience? Do they do digital tickets or physical tickets? That'll impact how much revenue they track to us. Do they have a famous, well-known prospect on their team or not this year?
Mhm.
There's all these other factors that go into purchase, even if we advertise the same. But the second is when we got started working with minor league baseball teams, we were up against another company that said, we're going to advertise heavily to the people coming to your website, which we all call remarketing. And we're going to advertise to the lookalike audience of the people coming to your
Mhm.
website. And we went, and then we were tested against that firm by one of the teams. And we said, no, this is something that can appeal to everyone. We need to reach the community at large and do so efficiently. And what we found is when we did that, we actually delivered 3x the ticket sales per dollar spent by casting a wider net because it is a broadly appealing activity.
Mhm.
And if you're losing 85% of your fans year over year, you need to make sure you're staying in front of them. They're not always going to show up in the lookalike audiences. So that's a real world case study to your point on how important it is to stay in front of those customers because a family could choose to go bowling,
Mhm.
they could choose to do mini golf, they could choose to go to a movie, they could choose to go to a restaurant, they could choose to go to a basketball game or a baseball game. And you want to stay top of mind so that they realize the benefits of that choice.
Certainly. Thank you for that. Adapting to market change. I'm curious, how would you suggest your clients adapt to changing market conditions and client needs? Is there perhaps an example that you could share of a successful pivot or adjustment?
Yeah, look, the only thing the only certainty in life is
Mhm.
change. It's Things are always going to change. And the best practice, the best advice I would give is the more that you can stay attuned to your customer and stay attuned to what they're seeing, feeling, experiencing. how they're thinking about their decisions. And if you have systems and process in place to continue to harvest that as close to real time on an ongoing basis, you will naturally adapt
Mhm.
to market change. It's, I think, when you lose touch with the customer or start focusing on what you want the customer to do versus what the customer needs, then it's easy to sometimes miss the
Mhm.
boat on market change. I'll relay an example from my prior career. You know, that PepsiCo has a lot of scale in operations, a lot of scale in operations. And so they can really efficiently produce and distribute products because of that scale. It's a tremendous competitive advantage that they've built over many years with lots of investment and hard work. What happened is competitors found that as the demographics in the market changed, there were more niche flavors, niche items that consumers were open to. Now, for PepsiCo, that looked like a production line shutdown, cleanup, seasoning change, packaging change. All of that creates inefficiency. It hurt margins. One of the objectives at Frito-Lay at that time was maintaining profit margins. And so what happened is it allowed competitors to erode where they were less concerned with margin because they don't have that operational scale. And it allowed them to adapt in real time. That's not to say PepsiCo didn't know or have their ear to the ground. That was their choice, and it was a business strategic decision. The stock has done very well over the last several years. So who am I to question it? But it was a choice that was made, but it presented an opportunity for new brands
Mhm.
to enter the market with products and offerings that didn't meet the PepsiCo criteria for scale.
Brilliant. uh, I know we've covered a fair bit of ground here, Aditya, but are there perhaps an aspect or two around this idea of advertising and incorporating AI, especially into it, that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Yeah, I think the big one is AI. AI is reading a data point and taking an action and learning from it and then taking a better action the next time a data point arises. That's the notion of it.
Mhm.
So it's very contingent on what can you read and what can you report on and what can you action.
Mhm.
A lot of times, particularly when it comes to advertising, when you're driving sentiment, that can be harder to measure. If I saw an ad for a vacuum cleaner today and I saw it and it highlighted a feature that I thought was brilliant and could make my life easier, but I would say I have a working vacuum. I don't want to buy a new vacuum cleaner. But that feature is cool for the next time. Then 8 months later my vacuum cleaner breaks. I find it's too expensive to repair. Then I buy that vacuum cleaner. You're never going to attribute it.
Mhm.
And how will AI find the data point to say I felt better about it? Now, maybe I visited the website, maybe there are going to be data points, but it's a little harder to measure the impact on emotion. And so many purchase decisions are made on emotion that we then rationalize after the fact. So I think when we're thinking about I think there's still a ways to go before we're able to use it to read people
Mhm.
and read sentiment. There's a lot of unarticulated sentiment we all have subconsciously. And what are the signals we're presenting to read that? And I've been involved with research on this front. I've been involved in seeing some of these things, talking to some of these companies, and I think there's still more to go. There was a company I talked to where they put a neural signal reader on your head. It was like went over your head, it looked like a scalp cover, had a bunch of wires, and they were reading neural response as you're presented with advertising and trying to correlate. And even that had
Mhm.
pitfalls. And so there's other companies that look at eyes and how the eyes dilate or don't dilate to try to read. There's still work to be done. I think it's going to take time, but there are always going to be things that are harder to read. And that's where the limitations of AI are going to ultimately come in. How do you drive emotion and measure the impact of emotion?
Mhm.
That's what makes us human.
Yep, absolutely. So, looking forward, what do you see as the future of Awarity and the work that
Yeah.
you're doing? Could you?
Our mission, and we're not going to stop until we get there, is to make world-class advertising accessible to everyone. So the product experience that we're ultimately trying to build towards, and this is what we've learned from our customers, is hopefully one day in the not so distant future, a company can just upload a customer list, will generate who their customer personas are that they're winning with, automatically translate that into an omni-channel advertising strategy that could include TV, banner ads like we currently offer, but offer potentially social media, search, mailers, billboards, radio, print, you name it. Offer an optimized omni-channel strategy that fits their budget, and then all done with AI, and then continue to read the impact at various stages of the customer journey and look to optimize messaging and budget allocation to uniquely optimize each stage of that journey to maximize that business's growth. And what I'd love to say is we can not only help small businesses, but we can help a lot of these brilliant creative agencies that are looking for ways to help their clients on the advertising side, where our tool could help deploy their strategic work more efficiently.
Look forward to that evolving. Aditya, if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, visit us at awarity.com, Awarity. Please reference this show but you can request a product demo. Someone on the team will talk to you, learn about your business, follow up with a proposal if that's something you're interested in. If you mention the show, I'll make sure I take a look at it personally and chime in with any thoughts that I might have. But that's the best way to find us. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, where sometimes, sharing different content that could be helpful. On our website is a completely free marketing blog that has videos and tutorials and various things. You don't need to enter an email. It's open for anyone to see at any time. So those are some other resources we offer. Our mission truly is to make world-class advertising accessible to everyone. And there's a lot of things people can benefit from and utilize from us without even engaging our service.
Brilliant. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Aditya, thank you so much for doing this. It's been very enlightening.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.